Hello and welcome to the global discussion. I'm your host, Simon Hodgkins. Today it's a little different. We're going to be talking about the second act of AI. AI's kind of come, it was very loud. The first phase of this AI boom was huge. But the second act, really, of I feel, has already begun and it seems to be getting faster. So let's break that down a little bit in this discussion here on the global discussion. So let's start with what it was about. The AI noise, the big boom in AI that came around was about chips. It was about data centers. It was about compute capacity. And I suppose who could train the biggest models the fastest? The capital poured in, the headlines followed, and everyone argued about who was going to win this arms race. The question is, has that phase completed? Is it largely complete? Not because innovation has slowed, but because the center of gravity seems to have shifted a little bit. Quietly, I suppose, almost uncomfortably so, for those who are just focused purely on infrastructure alone. So we move from that act of AI to the second act, which is, I suppose, adoption. And what comes next is AI adoption. And this is the part of the wider AI story that rarely feels as exciting in real time. It does not produce, I suppose, that dramatic product launches or the viral demos that we're all used to seeing. But historically, this is where long-term value is actually created and delivered. And I think, or I put forward the discussion that we're already at that phase. The pattern is familiar, even if the technology is not. Every major technology wave follows a similar arc. First, you build the rails, the hardware, the networks, the platforms, the foundational tools. And this phase often rewards things like speed and capital and technical audacity. It attracts a lot of attention and speculation, and that's something we've seen and continue to see around the world. But what comes next is a much harder phase. It's the one where companies have to make that technology useful, they have to make it reliable, and they have to embed it into everyday work. The one where this sort of return on investment matters more than the presentation decks and all the headlines that we hear. AI is immensely impressive. It's fundamentally changing everything. But when it comes down to the hard deliverables, what is the return on investment? How is AI actually being adopted? And are we benefiting from this? Look, we saw this with the internet. Anybody who's lived through the internet revolution, we saw it with smartphones, with mobile technology. We certainly saw it with cloud computing and cloud technologies. I don't think AI is any different. It just seems to be faster. The first act was about possibilities, I suppose. It painted a picture of what was possible about the future. But this second act that I'm talking about here today, I think it's about behavior change. And behavior change, rather than technical change, is where things really get real and where the true deliverables start to be seen with individuals and companies. I think at a personal level, people are using AI tools a lot more. Some companies are massively invested in their AI rollout, other companies are still hesitant. But adoption doesn't look like disruption at first. A mistake that I see people make is expecting this AI adoption to sort of announce itself, and they look for sweeping transformations across entire job categories. They see job categories disappearing overnight, or companies publicly declaring that AI has rewritten their business model. The bottom line is it rarely happens like that, maybe in some edge cases, but what actually happens is often a little quieter. A security team, for example, might reduce investigation time by 30%. An advertising team stops manually optimizing campaigns and starts supervising them. Or a legal team, for example, may accelerate document review without changing how they actually describe their work. Or an enterprise software platform adds AI features that feel incremental until they become indispensable. They become suddenly indispensable. These things don't really make the same loud headlines that we're used to seeing, but these are the type of activities, the real world activities, the adoption that starts to compound. And over time, that's what reshapes margins, it reshapes workflows, and it reshapes the competitive advantages in ways that become very hard to reverse. Now, advertising is already a preview of what's coming. Advertising has been an early adopter of new technology, not because marketers love novelty, but because the feedback loops are often fast and unforgiving. If something works, you see it in performance. If it does not, you move on. So AI is already deeply embedded here. Creative generation is becoming faster. It's becoming much more adaptive. Audience targeting is more dynamic. Measurement is shifting from static attribution models to probabilistic ones that learn continuously. And that's different. The most interesting part is not that ads are being automated. That's been happening for years. It's that human judgment is being repositioned. So marketers are less focused on execution and more focused on framing, constraints, and interpretation. The work is moving upstream. This pattern, I think, will probably repeat everywhere. Security and investigations are being quietly redefined. Security is another domain where AI adoption is happening under the radar. Threat detection, anomaly analysis, incident response generate more data than humans can reasonably process. We see that in the medical field too. AI does not replace analysts, but it changes the shape of their work and the shape of the tasks. So instead of searching for needles in haystacks, teams are validating, contextualizing, and making decisions faster. Investigations follow a very similar path. Whether it's fraud compliance or internal risk, the challenge is not a lack of data. There's too much data often. AI helps us surface patterns that would otherwise remain invisible. And it does so at a speed that changes what is operationally possible. That's why it feels faster. Again, this doesn't necessarily look like disruption. It looks like, hopefully, fewer later nights, shorter cycles, and better decisions. Enterprise software is where value tends to concentrate. So if history is any guide, enterprise software is where the second act becomes financially decisive. Infrastructure providers can often capture early value. Application and workflow platforms capture enduring value. Why? Because once AI is actually embedded into how work gets done, the switching costs rise, habits form, processes adapt. Organizations build muscle memory around tools that make them more effective. So this is not about adding chat interfaces to existing products. That's, I suppose, table stakes. It's about redesigning workflows around intelligence rather than automation alone, about systems that learn over time, about software that hopefully feels less like a tool and more like a collaborator. Now, software is going through huge change at the moment at the time of recording this particular conversation. But I'm sure that things are going to change. And it is slower work. It does require trust. It requires integration. It requires change management. But it's also, I think, where that durable advantage actually lives. The cultural shift is probably the hardest part, though. Technology adoption it's rarely limited by capability. It's limited by comfort. AI challenges how you and how people think about expertise, about ownership, and about control. And it asks probably the uncomfortable questions. That's not a bad thing. I mean, if a system can draft, analyze, or recommend at a higher level, what's your role? If decisions are augmented by models, where does accountability sit? If output improves but processes change, how do you evaluate performance? These aren't technical problems I put forward. They're probably more human problems. Companies that are treating this AI adoption as a cultural transformation, not just a technical rollout, are the ones I see moving faster, and I think they're the ones that will move faster in the medium to long term. Others may stall even with access to the same tools. Value creation happens after the hype fails. There's a moment in every technology cycle where attention moves on. Investors look for the next thing. Media narratives will cool. The hype curve bends downward. That's usually when the real builders get to work. So AI's second act, I think it's not about spectacle as much. Of course, it's going to create headlines. I think it's much more about the integration. It's about reliability, about making intelligence boring in the best possible way. So the companies that win will not necessarily be the loudest. They'll be the ones who customers suddenly cannot imagine working without what they offer. And that's how long-term value is built, gradually, quietly, and then it feels almost all at once. And maybe that's the most interesting part of this phase of where we're at. We're no longer asking whether AI is possible. We're learning how to live with it, work with it, and eventually depend on it. So I'm wondering how your AI journey is going. Make sure you share this episode of the Global Discussion. I hope it's been a bit of a thought starter. Things are changing rapidly. Who knows where we're going to be in 3 months, 6 months, or 3 years, or 6 years from now. But we are certainly in the second act of AI, and adoption is where it's at. So what are you doing to adopt and to move faster in this AI-driven world? Thanks for joining me here on the Global Discussion. I hope you tune in again to hear some more conversations. I'll be bringing some new guests to the show too. And make sure you give us a follow or a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks.